welcome. Today, we're getting into something that, well, frankly, it can make us a bit uncomfortable. We talk a lot about the economy or politics, but we don't often tackle power and class in America head on. Terms like power elite or dominant class, they can feel kind of un-American, clashes with our ideas about equality, opportunity for everyone. But what if those ideals, important as they are, maybe sometimes hide a more complex picture about who's really pulling the strings? That's exactly why we're doing this deep dive today. We're digging into G. William Domhoff's important book, Who Rules America? It's a piece of work that's been challenging assumptions for decades, and it's packed with research.
We want to unpack how this group he calls the corporate rich really functions as a cohesive unit, and crucially, how they influence policy, public opinion, often in ways you don't immediately see.
This American discomfort with glass. It's pretty unique. We use euphemisms, don't we, like the suits or Joe Sixpack. Anything but the direct word. How do social scientists cut through that? What does their approach tell us?
It's fascinating because while we might avoid the word, social scientists define power very specifically. It's what they call distributive power. So don't think absolute control like a dictator. Think more like a constant tug of war. Power means a group or class can consistently get what it wants, even if other groups are pulling hard the other way. It's about winning the key battles again and again. And they use three main indicators to measure this. First off, who benefits?
Yeah.
Simple enough, right? You look at how wealth and income are actually spread out. Domhoff lays out the history here like the top 1% held maybe 38% of all wealth back in 1916. That dipped, then kind of leveled off for a while. Same with income share, peaked in 28, then fell. But looking at these numbers over time, it shows this incredible concentration at the very top, even with huge changes happening in society. It's persistent. Second indicator, who governs? This asks, are certain groups way overrepresented in important jobs, in government, on boards, things like that? So if, say, 1% of the people hold 30% of the key government roles year after year, well, that tells you something. And the third one, who wins? When there's a direct conflict over a policy, who actually gets their way? And Domhoff's research, again and again, shows the corporate rich tend to win far more often than they lose when these big issues actually make it onto the government's agenda, even against unions or public opinion sometimes.
Okay, so we see how power works. But who are these groups? That brings us back to social class, the term we dance around with. We don't like the idea of fixed stations here. So what do academics like Domhoff actually mean by it?
Great. So forget simple income brackets for a second. Think of social class in Domhoff's terms, more like a really tight-knit community, almost like an exclusive club. He defines it as the biggest group where members have intimate access to one another. It's a network. Families, social circles, shared activities, the same prep schools, the same clubs, historically. These things weave people together, create a strong sense of us. And the really crucial point in the book is the overlap between the corporate community, the business world, and this upper class. Where they intersect, that's what he calls the corporate rich.
And that idea, it really does feel like it goes against the grain, the whole American grain idea. Why is that? Why are we so resistant to thinking in terms of class? Is it historical?
Oh, absolutely. Domhoff argues it's baked into our history. Think about the revolution. The leaders, often from higher classes, needed everyone else's support, so they had to make concessions like giving voting rights to white men even if they didn't own much property. They sort of had to promote this idea of equality to get independence.
Ah, okay.
And that created this powerful story, this cultural narrative about class that just stuck. It kind of pushed the reality of class into the shadows. And you see this reinforced even today by the institutions of the upper class. Those prep schools, exclusive clubs, the debutante balls we mentioned, they aren't just about fun. They build social cohesion. They give members this feeling of pride, maybe even superiority. And Domhoff calls this status power. It can make other people feel deferential, like they should know their place, without anyone saying a word. It's subtle. Like, think about programs helping a few low-income kids get into elite schools. It looks like upward mobility, but it also kind of reinforces the exclusivity while bringing new talent into their world.
Okay, so this corporate rich is this overlapping group. But how do they actually organize? Not just random rich people, right? Domhoff talks about the corporate community as this connected entity. How did that even come about?
Yeah, and its origins are interesting. Domhoff argues big corporations didn't just pop up because they were the most efficient way to do business. He points to legal changes and, importantly, class conflict back in the late 19th, early 20th centuries. It was a deliberate construction in many ways, and the core mechanism is the board of directors, usually 10 to 15 people. They meet maybe a dozen times a year. And the outside directors are key, the ones not working day to day at the company. They often bring a broader class wide view, making sure the company's policies fit with overall profit making, political acceptability for the whole corporate community.
The connections between these boards are pretty dense. The data on Interlocks is kind of wild.
It really is. Domhoff cites data showing, like in 2010, almost 90%, 9 out of 10 Fortune 500 companies were tangled up in this big network, directors sitting on multiple boards. And you see these core companies, big names, everyone knows IBM, Ford, GE, McDonald's right at the center, sharing directors with tons of other firms. It builds unity. It's not just about one company's bottom line. And don't forget privately owned corporations. Domhoff found hundreds of big ones, billions in sales, still privately held, often by families or investors. Plus, private equity firms like KKR. Think Henry Kravis, who's on like 8 corporate boards at one point. And this really pushes back against that whole Horatio Alger self-made myth, doesn't it?
Yeah, the rags to riches story.
Right. Kravis, for example, came from money. Even guys like Wayne Huizenga built waste management, often portrayed as starting from scratch. Nope, born into an elite suburb, family business ties, inherited wealth, connections. They're often the foundation, not just bootstrapping.
So, okay, you've got individual companies, private firms, interlocked boards. How do they coordinate on a bigger scale? Beyond just individual company interests, that's where the business associations fit in, right? Domhoff breaks them down.
Precisely. It's like different wings or factions, but all within that corporate community. You've got the real hardliners, the ultra-conservative wing. Think National Association of Manufacturers fighting unions, minimum wage for over a century. And the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, huge lobbying power. Then you have what Domhoff calls the corporate moderates. Groups like the Conference Board, mostly gathering info. The Business Council, they have these quiet, off-the-record meetings with top government officials, sometimes a bit more flexible on things like social insurance historically. And the Committee for Economic Development, the CED, big in post-war planning. The real heavy hitter, the coordinating force, is the Business Roundtable. Formed in the 70s, basically, to unite the corporate front against challenges from unions and liberals, what Domhoff calls the Liberal Labor Alliance.
That makes sense. But beyond organizing and lobbying, how else does this power work?
It's what Domhoff calls structural power. It's the power they have just by controlling investment. The ability to shut down a factory, lay people off, it hangs in the air, you know. It shapes what politicians feel they can or can't do, often without anyone even needing to make a phone call or donate a dime. It's that underlying threat. If policies aren't business-friendly, investment might dry up, jobs might go.
So it's a kind of silent leverage.
Exactly. It's always there. Now, it's not always enough. Domhoff mentions things like the Republic Windows strike or the huge railroad strike in 1877. Sometimes things boil over and structural power alone can't contain it. But it's a massive baseline advantage.
Okay, this is where it gets really fascinating for me. How do these powerful interests not just react, but actively create the policies and even the public narratives that help them? How do they shape the debate before it even gets to Congress?
Right, this is moving from defense to offense, essentially. And it involves 2 key networks. First, the policy planning network. Picture this. A whole ecosystem of nonprofits, foundations, think tanks, policy discussion groups, all funded and guided by the corporate rich. Their whole job is to research, develop, and promote policy ideas that align with corporate interests. And it's deeply interwoven. Domhoff found like 90% of these organizations were connected back to the corporate community in 2010.
90%.
Policy doesn't just magically appear in Washington. It's often forged, refined, and legitimized within this network first, making sure the options on the table are already tilted in a certain direction.
Domhoff gives some really concrete examples too, like foundations, the big ones, Gates, Walton, Ford, Robert Wood Johnson. Ford Foundation, for instance, funded early environmental groups like NRDC, but also funded urban programs that influenced the war on poverty, and funded studies critical of unions. It's complex, not always monolithic.
Definitely. And then think tanks. You've got Brookings, maybe leaning a bit more centrist or Democrat-friendly with things like the Hamilton Project, and then the big conservative ones like the American Enterprise Institute, AEI.
And the policy discussion groups seem really influential historically.
Hugely. The Council on Foreign Relations, the CFR, set up way back in 1921 by big bankers and corporate leaders. Their private studies during WWII basically laid out the blueprint for the post-war global economy, IMF, World Bank. The Business Roundtable, pushing hard for NAFTA, for permanent trade with China. They coordinate the big lobbying pushes.
Incredible level of planning. So they develop the policies. How do they get those ideas out there? Shape what the public thinks, what journalists report on.
That's the job of the second network, the opinion-shaping network. This uses giant public relations firms, corporate PR departments, and links them into a massive system for getting messages out. And the influence is often really subtle. It's about promoting individualism, getting people to blame themselves if they're struggling financially. Domhoff cites Sennett and Cobb here fostering this grumbling acceptance. You know the system isn't quite fair, but you think, well, maybe I just didn't try hard enough. It takes the focus off systemic problems.
That's powerful. And the examples Domhoff uses are pretty stark. PR firms like Burson Marsteller literally creating fake grassroots groups.
Yeah, like the National Smokers Alliance for Big Tobacco, making corporate agendas look like popular uprisings.
Or that strategy of just creating doubt about science. The tobacco memo. Doubt is our product. ExxonMobil funding think tanks to question climate change science.
Exactly, spreading uncertainty. And then you have things like the Ad Council, funded by huge corporations, Coke, Microsoft, J&J. They place billions in free public service ads every year. Seems harmless, right? But it subtly reinforces good Americanism, often in ways that align with corporate values.
And that Council on Economic Education example, blaming economic illiteracy on people not understanding saving and investing.
Classic victim blaming, right? Shifts the focus from, say, wage stagnation or lack of opportunity onto individual financial habits.
Okay, so we have this cohesive, corporate-rich community. They've got policy networks, opinion-shaping networks. How does this all cash out in elections and actual government action? How do they make sure Washington listens?
Well, first, Domhoff points to the very rules of the game. Our electoral system itself acts as a kind of filter, like the single-member district system we use, where winner takes all in each district. That was cemented back in 1842, partly, he argues, to stop worker-based parties from gaining traction, unlike in Europe with proportional representation.
And gerrymandering makes that even stronger, drawing districts to guarantee outcomes.
Absolutely. The example from 2012 is striking Republicans getting 72% of seats with just 53% of the votes in states they controlled. The rules matter.
And it wasn't just federal. He talks about local growth coalitions, changing rules in cities early on nonpartisan elections, things meant to lower turnout and hurt Democrats and socialists back then.
Right. Manipulating the mechanisms. Then, of course, there's campaign finance, just the sheer amount of money now. Court decisions open the floodgates. You've got secretive dark money groups, 501c4, super PACs. The 2012 election was called an arms race, hundreds of millions on both sides. That scale alone is a huge barrier to entry for anyone without access to big money.
And the Obama donor network example really illustrates that, doesn't it?
It does. His early support from developers, wealthy liberals, then the big families like the Pritzkers and Crowns stepping in. It shows how even candidates, starting from a more liberal position, often have to moderate their stances to secure that funding.
And Wall Street pulling back in 2012 after he criticized them shows it's not unconditional support.
Definitely not. Which leads to the question, who actually gets elected? Domhoff is clear. Mostly people from the top 10-15% occupationally. Business people, lawyers. Very few blue-collar workers make it.
And that Horatio Alger myth again.
Right. It persists. But even presidents often portrayed as starting from nothing, like Jackson or Lincoln, were actually pretty well off or connected to wealth early on. The myth obscures the reality of who tends to hold power.
And lawyers seem key here. Domhoff calls them pragmatists, go-betweens. Why?
Because their whole training is about negotiation, compromise, finding ways to balance the demands of wealthy donors with the need to, actually get votes from the public. Ambitious politicians learn early on they need to cultivate these relationships with money, and that often shapes their positions over time. Public opinion does matter on certain things. Domhoff acknowledges that, especially those really hot-button social issues, gun control, death penalty. Politicians usually don't push too far outside the public consensus there if they want to win.
But on economic issues.
That's where research by others, like Dielen's, cited by Domhoff, suggests public opinion has almost no impact on policy outcomes when it conflicts with elite preferences. A pretty stark finding.
Okay, so what about after the election? The day-to-day influencing, the special interest process.
Yeah, this is where the lobbying machine kicks in. Securing specific tax breaks, loopholes, favorable regulations. The spending is massive. Chamber of Commerce spending way more on lobbying than direct donations in 2012. Domhoff talks about Washington offices becoming profit centers, companies spending millions on lobbying to get back billions in benefits.
Like those 40 pages of loopholes in the Clean Air Act.
A classic example. And then think about who gets appointed to top government jobs. Cabinet secretaries, diplomats, judges. Domhoff shows they overwhelmingly come from the upper class, the corporate community, or that policy planning network. It's a revolving door for many.
And the Supreme Court, you mentioned its unique role.
Domhoff sees it as a crucial backstop for the corporate rich. Many justices historically, and more recently figures like Scalia, Thomas, Roberts, came from corporate law backgrounds. And the court has handed down decisions that make it harder to sue corporations, challenge monopolies, hold them liable. It acts as a brake on challenges from below.
Okay, let's try to pull it all together. Looking at the whole picture, the networks, the rules, the influence. What's the final takeaway? Who does rule America, according to this research?
Well, going back to those three indicators, who benefits, who governs, who wins? Domhoff's conclusion, based on decades of research, is pretty clear. The corporate rich consistently come out on top. They have a bigger share of the pie, wealth, and income than elites in other comparable democracies. They're massively overrepresented in government and key decision-making roles. And when push comes to shove on major policy fights, they usually win. It paints a picture of a deeply rooted, highly organized system of influence.
But it feels like a paradox sometimes. Since the 60s, we've seen big expansions in individual rights, civil rights, LGBTQ+ rights, women's rights. How does that fit with the idea of increasing class domination, which Domhoff also argues happened, often helped by the Supreme Court?
That's a really important point. And Domhoff suggests it's partly because the U.S. developed differently than many European nations. Historically, we had a weaker central government, no huge standing army for a long time, deep social divisions like race, weaker unions. These factors made it harder to build broad counterweights to corporate power. So the corporate rich could, in a sense, afford to concede ground on some social issues while simultaneously tightening their grip on economic policy and power. The two trends aren't necessarily contradictory.
But it's not like there's no opposition, right?
Yeah,
Unions, academics, civil rights groups, environmentalists, they do push back.
absolutely. The struggle is real and ongoing, but that alliance faces huge challenges. Their interests aren't always aligned. Think jobs versus environment sometimes. Internal disagreements happen. And crucially, they are consistently massively outspent by corporate interests. We saw that with lobbying figures. It's an uneven fight.
And Domhoff points to legislative defeats under administrations, like Obama's, the Employee Free Choice Act dying, weak financial reforms.
Exactly. It shows the limits of the power against the entrenched structures. But Domhoff ends on a more open note, which I think is important. He emphasizes that history isn't predetermined. Social scientists can map out the power structures, the trends, but they can't predict the future perfectly. Unexpected crises, the Great Depression, the Civil Rights Movement's peak, maybe the 2008 crash they create, as he puts it, new cracks and openings. And those moments, they offer opportunities. Organized activists, even facing long odds, can sometimes seize those moments to push for real change. It suggests agency still exists, even within this system of domination.
So the story isn't finished. The game isn't over. The dynamics keep shifting. And there are always possibilities for change, even if they're hard to foresee. Or this deep dive into Domhoff's Who Rules America has hopefully given you a valuable shortcut, a clearer lens for understanding these complex, often hidden structures of power in America.
The big takeaway really is this picture of a sophisticated, interconnected system. The corporate rich, using their specific institutions or networks, exert this deep influence on policy, on opinion, on government itself. And they've often managed to maintain or even strengthen that dominance even as society changes in other ways, like with individual freedoms expanding. It's a complex dynamic.
How might you look at the news differently? Or politics or social issues? What really stands out to you from Who Rules America?